You are Dr. Shabeena Kuttay, and you are Associate Professor and Head of the Department of English at the Governmental Degree College Magam, Department of Higher Education in Jammu and Kashmir. Welcome.
Thank you so much. A privilege to be here.
You are a teacher and a researcher of postcolonial literature. What is it like to teach English language postcolonial literature in Kashmir?
Well, to be a teacher of post-colonial literature and post-colonial studies, I assume it would be the same everywhere as in the rest of the post-colonial world, especially in the post-colonial states. But however, being in the global south, talking about global south, gives us twofold privileges. One is while we're teaching our students, our learners, critical thinking, vis-a-vis their identities and identities as post-colonial subjects, we are also simultaneously able to see this as an opportunity for distant places like Kashmir to be engulfed in the whole gambit of globalization. I teach, for instance, post-colonial literatures from across the world. So a student of Kashmir at the same time is confronted with writers from Nigeria, Kenya, Australia, Canada. And while they're developing their critical understanding of the post-colonial theory, they're able to see post-colonial theory in practice as well. So whether it is post-hyphenated colonial or post-colonial in continuation, teaching post-colonialism has been amazing as far as Kashmir is concerned, and students respond so much to it because, as I said, being post-colonial subjects themselves, being descendants of in a country that has one of the longest standings of colonialism, that had faced the brunt of colonialism for a very long time. They do use their studies as a means of carving their own identities, understanding their identities in the present cosmopolitan world.
Post-colonial literature has been described as both a site and a tool of decolonization. How does that work in Kashmir?
As I said earlier, for post-colonial subjects or post-colonial sites, it works much less the same way as it works in Burma. It would work that much in Kashmir as well, because when political colonization was finally over, 1947 for India, for instance, for Burma in 1948, for other places in different time eras, we saw a huge corpus of works coming from these very nations, post-colonial states, recently emancipated states, where writers tried to use literature as a tool, as a medium of establishing their emancipation. Now, they had already gotten politically free. They're politically free as far as colonization was concerned. But to transfer that understanding into the minds of people themselves was the greatest challenge that most post-colonial writers had to face. And in India, for instance, most of the writers that came in the post-colonial era, they had to work really hard to understand, their position in the world, to carve an identity for their countries. We have India. In India, for instance, we're celebrating 75 years of independence. We call it the Amrit Kal. A lot has happened in this time, but the greatest contribution, I suppose, goes to writers like Salman Rushdie, like Arundhati Roy, like Amitav Ghosh, Karan Desai, those who tried through different mediums, through their thematics, through their language usage, to what Rushdie himself would call the empire writing back. So in order to be able to do away with the legacies of colonialism, they took the language that the erstwhile colonizers had implemented as a tool of colonization and used the same language as a medium, as a way of asserting their individuality, their individual identities. So we won't hear English in India as a separate language. You'll hear of it as Indian English. So they have been able to Indianize English. They have been able to regionalize English. They have been able to do all kinds of experimentations with the language and a foreign language meant for a colonial purpose, and used it as a way of establishing themselves in the post-colonial world.
Your own research has focused on how authors from previous colonies employ a particular thematic, linguistic and structural technique in their writing. How do these techniques help these authors to juxtapose the post-colonial and the neo-colonial in the context of the global South?
When we understand post-colonialism in the hyphenated term, post-colonialism, we see that nothing about the contemporary times strictly talks about any end of colonization. Yes, literally speaking, geographically speaking, politically speaking, colonization is over. But how much have the relations of power, the hierarchies of power changed preceding colonialism and after colonization was over? We have, I take especially the case of India, which is my field of study. We had these colonial apparatuses in place, driven primarily by economic pursuits. Profit was what brought the British East India Company to India. It was profit, it was capital that sustained first the company, then the British rule in India for almost 200 years. But once they departed, capital remained. So in literal sense, we say, yes, colonization is over. But when we say the way the West, especially Britain being a part of it, how they were able to create a global order under the pretext of corporate capitalist globalization, how they used these terms as a continuation of the whole process of colonization. Of course, with the exception of physically going and colonizing a country. Yet our economies, yet our politics is determined by the First World. Even after the departure, or even after 8 decades, we still are subservient to capital. We are still subservient to the global market economy that primarily works on global deregulation. There is a concentration of wealth in fewer and fewer hands, and not much exploitation has been taken care of. The natural resources, human resources are still being exploited under the garb of globalization, and in a very, which carries a positive valence. It's not negatively perceived as something wrong, but it does somehow operate more or less in the same way that colonization, erstwhile colonization, existed. We sometimes, in our theory circles, we like to call it as the new empire. The new empire, well, you are not concerned, as you were rightly saying earlier, that they're not worried about the social welfare of these countries. They're not. They don't have to worry about. By they, I mean to say, the West. Britain being a part of it, the West, mostly the first world countries, the international financial institutions, and the corporate capital. All of these together form that invisible empire that has still a lot of power in orchestrating not just the economic, the politics, even social and cultural norms within the global South, India being no exception to it.
One of the greatest challenges that we face in the present moment is climate breakdown. This is a very uneven process, so that people in the global south and in the global north experience this in very different ways. What role does post-colonial literature play for our understanding of this situation, do you think?
Well, I think the disparate problems that we have been facing over the past few decades, climate disasters being one of them, all of them, in my understanding, and they all emanated from the whole system of capitalism. Not in its, if not in its entirety, if not directly, then indirectly. Previous centuries brought us to what we would call the cataclysmic events of the wars. And wars causing destruction of people, of homes, of ecosystems, all driven by capitalism. And my understanding goes that, though I'm not an expert in the geological phases and eras, but the Anthropocene, whereby human activities triggered, if not brought about, at least triggered, an entire geological age. It reminds me of this Scrat, the Ice Age movies, if you have gone through the franchise, where the small Scrat is always in the beginning of the movie trying to run after that nut and trying to locate it or trying to find it and trying to hold on to it. We usually are more focused about the rest of the movie, where the mammal and the saber and the sloth, entertain us. But if we look at his triggering the Pleistocene Ice Age, every time he's after that corn and he's trying to either break it or find it, he triggers it. That is what capitalism did to the Anthropocene era. That is whereby most of the problems that, whether it was the ecological disasters we've been facing, whether it is the unprecedented climatic changes that we have been seeing over the years, it has all some connection with human exploitation of not just humans, but of nature. This has a lot of significance, I believe, in the global south more than anywhere else, because these are essentially cultures. These are essentially people that depend a lot on their nature, Mother Nature, not just in a metaphorical senses, but we actually have cultures that revere nature to the utmost. And any kind of disruption that we see brought about by developmental induced displacements or industrialization or changing of the geography of a particular region. All of these not only have implications for humans, it has implications for nature as well. And in India, for instance, there are double implications, because one is that people will be affected, the second is that nature will be affected, the third is people who rely on nature will be affected more. We consider that in the age of liberal logic, the defense of planetarity is not only an alternative, but I believe it's the only option left in the present times, where we can, instead of being relegated to the agents of the global system, turn into planetary subjects that are working towards restoring some kind of balance that human activities, especially somehow my belief being driven by capitalism and globalization, we try to bring some kind of balance into it. And the role of writers, intellectuals and activists has been more so in it. And I think as academicians also, we have some role to play in it, whereby we can explain or at least expose how the stakes and consequences of globalization are far more dangerous than we would want to believe. And as weather and climatic patterns are witnessing, kind of drastic changes, we have to remind ourselves again and again that nature is not a force that can be silenced. That is a tool we can use with people, with societies, with cultures. But nature doesn't prescribe to that logic. We have in Kashmir, for instance, we're having the extinction of common house sparrows. You will see the same kind of sparrows here also. But in Kashmir, they're near extinction because of massive constructions going on, hydropower projects coming up, big industries coming up, the information technology towers coming up, all related to globalization, are somehow having an effect on minor species. But while it might not seem so important in the whole system of capitalism, but it does have implications. It does have implications because as we witnessed one of the most dreadful of floods in 100 years in Kashmir in 2014. So the extinction of one species and floods on the other are all nature's way of telling us that, we need to do something to restore that kind of balance. I'm reminded of Elton Krennic, who, while writing during the pandemic, said, the virus isn't killing animals, it's not killing birds, it's just us humans. So the Mother Nature is trying to get back at what we are trying to take away from it. And we need to look at this planet as a living thing rather than a globe that I get distraught on my table. So that is...
Thank you. Thank you so much.